It's interesting that we're talking about images because my whole life is about images, and I'd like to share some images with you. This is arriving in Darwin, moving in from Melbourne. I was flying in November 2 years ago to talk to some very fine people here about considering taking on the role of director of the Museum and Art Gallery of the Northern Territory. And I'd just like to tell you a story about how a kid from Eastern Ontario ends up managing a museum and art gallery in the Northern Territory.
Chief Tool was the fire manager.
You see these views as you fly in here in the build-up, these incredible clouds and towers of clouds. This is where it starts. My story starts here with Isabel and Roger, my mom and dad, turning a moment into a memory around 1955. My dad's a professional photographer. My mom's a grade school teacher in a one-room classroom, and he's doing the rounds as a photographer. They meet, they fall in love, they marry. They move to a little house in Eastern Ontario, an 1850 log cabin that my grandfather had left them, and they start a life. This is the road in front of our house in the middle of winter. This is the family. Obviously, my brother Michel is taking the photograph because it's always my dad who's taking the photograph. So he's never in the photo. He's never in the image himself. So another view. My mom and dad, you can see a playful image with my dad wearing a little crown at a birthday celebration. Another one of these rare images where my dad's actually in the picture. What they gave me, my dad taught me how to draw because he drew beautifully. Aside from being a photographer, he actually taught me how to draw. And my mom taught me how to love books and how to read. And these are some of the things that have informed my life. This is the École Saint-Paul de Plantagenet, a very progressive little Catholic school where I had the good fortune to study as a kid. You'll see various images. We posed all the time. My dad was a photographer. We all were always in front of the camera. So every time there was a new car or a special celebration, we would be posing and smiling. So I've been doing this all my life. So when you see me in front of a camera going like this, it's because I've been doing this all my life. This is the family again at Expo 67. You remember Buckminster Fuller's dome. And from left to right, Serge, Daniel, Roger, Pierre, Mimi, and Michel. The earliest one born in 1963 and the first one born in 1956. Good Catholic family. This is one of the key images of my youth. I also, as I said, my mom encouraged us to read and to appreciate books, and my dad bought books, and this is one of the key images of my youth. We all know who she is. I started loving art because I read about art and I saw art in books. And I thought I could become Leonardo. So this is Leonardo's Last Supper before Restoration, and this is Pierre's Last Supper. I don't know where the guy in yellow comes from because he's actually not, see, he's not there. So a bit of improvisation here. But I wanted to become an artist. There was something in me that related my brain to the exterior world that meant that I wanted to paint and draw. So I drew and I drew and I drew and I drew. And I'm not sure. This is, the earliest image was 1969. This is 1975. I'm 16 years old, drawing a portrait of my grandmother, Irene, from various photographs of various parts of her life, from early woman to the age of 40 to the last portrait of about the age of 65. At the age of 19, self-portrait, I'm thinking about Escher, you know, the distortions through mirror and how you look at the world. And I started creating portraits. These are large pastels. My friend Mary, my sister Mimi, and the Arpin family in hell. My mom and her friend Lise, when it was still fashionable to smoke and actually be photographed with a cigarette in your hand. And my very good friend Sheila, who became one of my favorite models. Sheila with her diploma, freshly graduated from Carleton University. Sheila, who was a dancer doing the Dying Swan at lunchtime. Like father, like son, tel père, tel fils, so genetically encoded love of drawing and images and portraiture, and a double portrait that we did about 1982. My good friend Wes, my brother Roger. This is, these are moments in time where your life changes. 1984, I'm about to quit my BFA because I said, I've had enough, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to go and have a stupid job and live my life. On the 16th of July, my brother Roger died. He had a brain tumor, fell in his face forward in 2.5 centimeters of water, and he died. And I decided I'd better take my life in my own hands if I want to do something with it. And I started drawing family portraits, a whole series of family portraits that came out of this quite tragic event. We're talking about large drawings here. This is 6 by 4 feet. I just filled my house with my family. Expo 67 again, but again in this time, 6 by 4 feet. All these memories came flooding past, and of course I'm using my dad's photographs to interpret my own life. This is Dad with Roger in his arms. Around 1989, I move into my own studio and I start producing these huge portraits. This is my friend Anne in an earlier state, and this is the finished portrait. My good friend John in 2 takes with an earlier portrait and a later portrait. My friend Louis sitting quite formally. You can get a sense of the scale of the images in my studio. I had the good fortune of presiding a council, an arts council in Ottawa, and we took over a school, and where there were no studios for artists in Ottawa, we took the whole school, and all of a sudden there were 60 people with studios working, and that's how it transformed my work. You can see the scale here of John's portrait, and this series of images of my friend Paris in her studio with some thinkers. 1994, I moved to Montreal. Something shifted again. I'd become really interested in art history. I'd done my BFA, but I wanted to finish my MA in art history. So I moved to the city of Montreal, and strangely, I stopped painting. I stopped drawing, and I became a museum professional. I moved to the town of Sudbury, Ontario, a tough mining town that had a really interesting landscape. This is my mom in front of the smelters of Sudbury, and you see to her right the tailings of nickel smelting that basically ruined the landscape around the city. One of the things we did in this fine institution was to say, how do we reconnect the people to the landscape, to this landscape that had basically been destroyed through open pit smelting through decades? So we tell the story of what happened here. This is a mural that was produced and shown at the 1930s Paris World Fair, Canadian artist Charles Comfort. And here, a beautiful project. We took Henry Orenstein's mine mill mural, which had been hanging in the mine mill, covered in cigarette soot and smoke, 50 years worth of accumulation, cleaned it completely, installed it in the gallery, and you see here the landscape of Sudbury as retold by Henry Orenstein, and installed it in the gallery, then returned it beautifully pristine to the mine mill. Another change in my life, my partner Anthony Watts, an Australian, that's why I'm in Australia today. We met in 1999, we started a long-distance relationship, became frequent flyers, and then we finally settled in Canada, and then ended up in Melbourne. This is the Winnipeg Art Gallery that I had the good fortune to manage for a few years, and look folks, it is true in Canada we can walk on water. This is the Red River with about 3 meters of ice around February. Another story about the cold. I had the good fortune also to work for the Canada Council for the Arts as their visual arts officer, and we visited the Northern Arctic for about a week to determine why was it that the community, one community in Canada that had 30% of its residents were practicing artists, how come they didn't apply for council funding? So we met with a number of artists and communities, and this is the town of Iqaluit. One of the good fortunes in my life is I've been able to see so much landscape and so diverse landscapes. So when you go there and you see things like the Inukshuk in the front, the stone pillars, which is how the Inuit people direct themselves and find themselves through landscape, it's a quite wonderful experience. And you know you're in another land when you have stop and Iqaluit language in the bottom to actually direct you. As I was saying, 30% of the people there are artists. At the Cape Dorset printmaking studio, some of the most beautiful prints being made still by these master printmakers. And same thing here, working on a plate. In the town of Pangnertung, a fantastic tradition of weaving and tapestry making. And this is when you know you're not in Canada anymore. the Hudson's Bay Company in the inlet of Pangnertung, some of the most stunningly beautiful landscape I've seen in my life. And as I can say, have the good fortune to have witnessed this amount of cold. We're back in Ottawa. It's time to move again. I've been offered a job. I'm moving a bit further off. We're packing yet again, moving. Leaving Ottawa at -25, landing in Melbourne at 45.8 degrees Celsius the week before Black Saturday to take on the role of general manager at the National Gallery of Victoria. So once again, a really interesting experience, huge institution, possibly the best collection in the Southern Hemisphere, and the good fortune to work there for a couple of years. And as you can see, a very different landscape from what I was used to. And these fantastic public spaces in this city. Other landscapes throughout Australia, and this is where I'm telling myself it may be time to leave Melbourne. The flash storms of March 2010, and then the demonstrations on the streets with protesters and mad vegetables. I knew, I knew it was time to leave. So we're back on the plane, back where we started. One thing that happened, as I was saying, I'd forgotten along the way, becoming an administrator, a director, and all of these things, that I'd forgotten how to be an artist. And I'd like to start with this slide. Is a sequence of images of a drawing being drawn. My good friend Kate Davis. This is a smaller drawing, about this big, of course from a photograph. The drawings should start moving slowly. Kate and I met in 1996 when I became the director of the Art Gallery of Sudbury. She was the president of the Canadian Art Museum Directors Organization, and she became my mentor and my friend, and we became really good buddies in tough times, because managing things in the arts in the 1990s was a really tough gig. Governments were slashing and burning funding for institutions, and we really had to really pick up the pieces and start thinking differently about how we were managing institutions. But here's a drawing as it moves along. You can see that you define space, you try to create negative, positive balance, and it moves very slowly. This drawing that you see here took a long time, because as I said, I hadn't been drawing for a while. But life sometimes tells you you have to create a drawing or you have to create a work of art. In this case, my friend Kate, I last saw in October of 2010. This particular image was taken when I was still living in Winnipeg. Anthony and I drove to Regina, and we spent the afternoon with Kate and her husband John in this beautiful nature reserve. And I wanted to mark this particular afternoon because sometime in 2009, Kate developed a very severe primary cancer. She was treated for about 6 months, and she survived, and we jubilated and had a beautiful dinner. And then 3 months later, she called back to say they found a secondary cancer that he hadn't even seen the first time. And I was able to visit her in Toronto. I was in Melbourne at the time, so I walked into her hospital room. She had been basically in a coma for 2 days, non-responsive. I walked into her home. I held her hand, and she woke up and said, "I'm so happy you came." And we chatted for about 10 minutes. That was her last conversation. 2 days later, she died. So I'd just like to leave you with this drawing that's going to unfold for a few minutes in celebration of a life in drawing. Life drawing is an expression when you're in a classroom and a model in front of you is called life drawing. This is life drawing, but also drawing life, and a tribute to my friend Kate. Thank you very much.